On tonight's Cover One Buffalo podcast, I am joined by the Athletics' Joe Buscaglia, but first, our guys, Handsome Jack.
Broadcasting live to Bills Mafia Worldwide with Greg Tompsett and Aaron Quinn.
Welcome to the NFL. Doesn't matter what's happened before today. Today's a brand new day. It's a brand new season.
Your number one podcast for objective Buffalo Bills coverage. No matter where you are, we got you covered.
Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joined by your host, Greg Tompsett, along with a different partner in crime. I am joined by the Athletics' Joe Buscaglia. Joe, how we doing?
I'm great, Greg. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. I'm really excited to have you on again. It's been a while since we've been able to chat, and there's a lot of fun stuff going on. Unlike James Cook, Aaron Quinn couldn't even show up. Going to have to deal with the fines for missing this minicamp show. We had some fun pre-show. Aaron just had a really good run with equipment and technology and things for a good long while, maybe a couple of years even, and nothing would work today. So feel free, everyone listening, go on Twitter, give Aaron a hard time about his equipment not working. That'll make it significantly worse and more frustrating for him and much more enjoyable for me. Aaron's holding out for an extension, trying to get a little bit more money here. So we'll see where that goes. But, Joe, we just had, the voluntary OTAs into the first couple of days here of mandatory mini camp. We'll start with the joke I made opening up here. Were you as surprised as some of the other folks were that James Cook showed up? I know I knew and had done some of the research with Joel Corey and some of the other folks to realize the contractual ramifications of, hey, he's going to show up at training camp because it's giving up unrestricted free agency. But I honestly didn't think he'd show up at mandatory minicamp. I thought that might be the principled make a point miss. So when he was there and participated, I was very pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I wasn't super surprised, to be honest with you, for him showing up to minicamp, just because getting to know James a little bit over the last few years, just getting kind of a glimpse into his personality. He didn't really strike me as the type that would, completely stay away from the team no matter what. Like the whole notion of him staying away and distancing himself, that just never really jive to me with what I knew of him. And, granted, I only talked to him in very small snippets of time in the locker room. So it's not as though, we're going off and having lunch on the daily or anything like that. But you kind of get to know a person. And I think that to me would have surprised me if he would have stayed away completely. And plus the fact, he kind of said it best. Like, he doesn't want to get fined $100,000. I certainly wouldn't want to get fined $100,000. So I don't necessarily blame him. What I am somewhat surprised by, but maybe only 50%, is that he did actually go through the paces of the workouts. I thought maybe that might have been the area where he kind of dialed it back a little bit, but he went through and did everything. He was taking running back snaps. He was going through positional drills. He was going through team drills. He's going through 7-on-7. So there were no limitations whatsoever. It kind of reminded me a little bit of, remember when Jordan Poyer, we didn't know if he was going to show up. I think it was a year or 2 years ago. And then he just popped in there and then he did everything. So It was pretty much the same situation.
Yeah, I remember Rosenhaus making the big appearance there beforehand along with him. And I'll say even a step further, someone who obviously doesn't always, not the most loquacious guy, he doesn't, share a ton, as far as that goes. I was really impressed with the way he handled himself in the presser with you guys and the questions that he got. No one was grilling him or anything like that. But the one little joke about I like my money, but then the comments about no, I understand that if we want to make a run of the Super Bowl, I want to be here and be able to do those things. I just thought that was a really mature way to approach this, and that, I won't be naive. I'm sure he and his camp have a pretty good idea where their number is. They know where Bean's number is. I think it's fairly clear that those numbers aren't all that close, and that I don't think either side expects there to be enough movement for some miraculous quick extension here. But I think that keeping it professional, cordial and positive, leaves open that idea, because some fans forget that we've had some longtime guys who went into the season into that February window and then all of a sudden got an extension, Matt Milano being one that comes to mind, where many people had prepared as though he was leaving because we got all the way to that point and signed an extension beforehand. So I don't know the likelihood. I don't know the change of that. It could, if all of a sudden some of the pass protection and the three down workload stuff really takes an uptick here, maybe that shifts Bean's number further and they find a kind of stasis point. But I was impressed overall. I thought that he handled himself well, made a lot of really positive comments, and was a pleasant surprise to many. The folks who were close to you and many others who were closer, I think, had a similar vibe of him as a person and kind of got the idea that he was going to show up here. But a lot of fans only see the social media part of it and took that as more of a surprise.
Yeah, he's very sneakily. He's a pretty funny dude, and he kind of, and he's not really at the podium all that often or in front of the microphone for the big press conference all that often, even though he's a bigger name player. But when you get him off to the side and you're chatting up with him a little bit, he's a pretty funny dude. But yeah, I thought he handled himself really well. And he kept his options open too, so he was smart from that capacity. Like when my colleague Tim Graham asked him just to clarify if he would do a hold in and report it, even though he said he would report to training camp. He said, "I don't know, man. We'll see what happens when we get there." So just leaving his options open. Do I think it's going to come to that? Probably not. That would just be my guess without knowing anything. No, that's not reporting anything. It's just just trying to figure out what would make the most sense for him to extract the type of money that I think he wants. And, to go into the season and completely play lights out, I think would be his best thing he could possibly do this year. To, if it's not for the Bills, then for someone else to give him somewhere closer to what he is valuing himself as. But those other pieces you brought up are super important. Like the Bills haven't paid a running back. There's no doubt around that. Brandon Beane is not shelling out that money to just anybody, but it's not as though he's against it, because he's been sniffing around these bigger name running backs like McCaffrey, Kamara, who are on big contracts. So it's not as though he's against it, but the big difference is exactly what you brought up. Like, they are 3-down players. They are type of players, and they just have not committed to James Cook that way in either of the last 2 seasons, and even less so last year. So if that changes this year, if he starts to get on the field a bit more, if maybe they take away a bit from Ty Johnson, and it's kind of a weird thing because they've got Ray Davis there who they like, they've got Ty Johnson there who they like, and brought back at a pretty manageable number and signed for 2 years, which I don't think was a coincidence here.
Agreed.
That all kind of lines up to where I don't know exactly if his role is going to be all that different this year. And then it comes down to, is he really going to have the same touchdown luck as he did last year, where he literally tripled his total touchdowns from the previous season? That's a big if.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different pieces. I think it's easy to use the principle of like, hey, in the modern NFL, you don't pay running backs, you draft, and replace. And they've done that for the most part, Singletary to Moss to Cook to Davis. And that I think the easy path is like, well, yeah, they'll just do the same thing. They let Cook walk. And then next year they'll draft a quick explosive guy to put with Davis and rinse and recycle. And I think, for the most part, I think that probably is fair to say that, yeah, that's probably Brandon Beane's plan A. I think that looking at 8 years of being a GM and literally paying the least money to the running back position of any of the 32 teams during his tenure is more than a coincidence. I think that that's a strategy. However, I do think there's a line that if you stumble across and you draft a Saquon Barkley, you draft a Derrick Henry, you draft a Christian McCaffrey, I think that there's nothing wrong with paying the guy who can be an explosive weapon. And the hard part is, I think Cook is really, really good. I think he's Aaron Jones. I think he's, Joe Mixon. I think he's, a lot, maybe even Josh Jacobs. Jacobs is a little bit more in the 3-down realm, but is really, really good. And the question is, like, where do you draw that line? Is that line just above those guys? Is it just below those guys? And I think we'll see, so far we have seen where the two sides have valued themselves, but we'll see where Beane ends up. Some of the other top, go ahead.
I was just about to say, absolutely. Beane would pay for it.
Yeah.
If they prove themselves to be an anomaly at the position. And if they are not that, then I think they're playing this straight up, because Cook, to me, I'm not sure if he is that anomaly type of player that they're looking for. And could he be somewhere? Maybe. But they just have never put that type of workload on him. And I think that kind of speaks to the situation in itself too. Like, if they believe that he could be that, then he would have gotten all those snaps last year, right?
Great litmus test. I think if you get a guy that not only do they to break the tendency and plan and strategy of paying a running back, you would have a guy who forces their hand to break the tendency of the rotation and the playing style. And that all of a sudden, if we see a guy that like, oh, this running back's playing 75-80% of snaps and really becoming a bell cow because they see him as a guy that, hey, we can't afford to take him off the field, similar to Ed Oliver and Gregory Rousseau, when their snap counts went way above the other guys in the rotations, and be like, hey, playoff games, critical games, they were playing 80% of snaps. No other defensive lineman ever did that in this entire run. That's when you say, okay, those are guys you pay. Two, that's different and a different way of valuing and seeing them. I think that's a great idea and a great litmus test for fans to look for, that you would see it on the field first, and then you'd see it correlate to the paycheck.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
So a couple other topical things before a couple questions on the title of the show. We saw Shaq Thompson added here. I know that I think rightfully linebacker wasn't a huge priority coming into the season. There was renegotiation, restructuring of trading off some short-term money and eliminating the later years for Matt Milano. There was last year some fans clamoring for Dorian Williams to play and maybe even to play over Matt Milano. There was Terrell Bernard, who I think a lot of us at Cover One have really pushed back on the idea that there was any like fallback or regression there, but there wasn't as many splash plays as what we saw the year before. But all of that happened with no material additions, no major draft picks, no major free agent signings, some UDFA additions. And I think that maybe we would have expected a little bit to come through. So, of course, it was the Carolina pipeline, maybe legitimately the last NFL player floating around who had a legit connection to that group. Like, there might not be many others that are there. First 8 years, super reliable, played 14 plus games every season for 8 years. The last two, a nasty leg fracture and then an Achilles tear, coming back at 31, not always a guarantee. What were your thoughts when you saw Shaq Thompson come in? I thought it was a nice presser, and a guy who still carries himself with that mindset to see himself as a contributor. But I would say, I want to tell myself it's more than Deion Jones' addition last year, but I keep kind of catching myself on the health piece of it. That I think he's probably linebacker 5, and maybe he pushes for linebacker 4 if he's able to stay healthy.
Yeah, I think linebacker 5 is probably the top part of what he can do, just because he's not that far removed from the injury to where you can actually expect him to do all. My idea behind the signing might be, okay, see what he has, and then worst case scenario, he's one of your veteran stashes on the practice squad, and you keep him because you know what he's all about, his character. And they're big on that stuff for the practice squad, to have those type of guys in the building. Like Kareem Jackson last year was a perfect example of a guy that, had loads of experience. They knew he was never going to see the light of day, or at least they hoped, because they had a lot of safeties already in front of him.
And Will Clapp later was being game day active over Van Perren Granger.
Right. They have all of these veterans in the locker room from that perspective. So even if he doesn't stick on the 53-man roster, I think that could be a pretty nice little role for him. And I think for him at this point of his career, reconnecting with Sean McDermott, the guy who kind of helped him do what he did, and Brandon Beane being one of the people that drafted him in Carolina, I think that all kind of checks those boxes for them. Very quite similar to, when Kirk Coleman was here for a cup of coffee a little bit. He had some Carolina ties to those guys as well, and certainly that helped lend itself to that relationship too. Even though Coleman was on the 53, but I think that could be the play. But this linebacker room, it's there's the top 3, and past that, it's a little wide open. Like, there's no guarantee that Balen Spector is the backup middle linebacker this year. Joe Andreessen is pushing. and he has had a great minicamp so far. And he came a long way from where he started at training camp last year. And Spector is again hurt, and that is the biggest thing about his career to this point. And then their fifth round pick from last year, Edifuan Ulofosio, haven't really seen him take a stride forward. And I kind of wonder if he's like on that cut line right now as to if he's even going to make the team, even though they drafted him last year. They have 100 defensive linemen at this point that are vying for the 53-man roster. And, can they afford to keep 6? That's kind of where this whole situation lies. So if they do keep 6, maybe Shaq Thompson or, Edifuan Ulofosio have a chance, but I'm not convinced that they do this year just because of the stress of the rest of the roster.
Yeah, there's going to be some really tough positions. Some guys pushing for, a 6th wide receiver, a 10th offensive lineman, heck, an 11th defense. It's going to be defensive lines going to be a disaster to try to figure out.
And that's not even considering the fact that they have to get 2 more roster spots on week 7 for Hoyt and Ogunjobi. So yeah, they've got a delicate balancing act here.
Yeah, and there's some parallels to a 5th round receiver earlier, or 5th round linebacker earlier in Bean's tenure, where there was some health issues, but you take a flyer the first year, you kind of hide him, and then the second year it ended up not working out, and that was Voshon Joseph. It was some similar parallels. Guy that they like the play, but had some health issues. That's why he fell lower in the draft. They take a shot on him, kind of healthy scratch, stash him the first year, and I think Voshon was more of like one of those like quote finger quote IR injury, like, yeah, you're gonna go on the IR. And Ulofosio was just game day inactive most of the season. But in the second year, if it wasn't there at that point, when you're a 5th round pick or later, like the if you look at the ratio, like 5th round picks make rosters rookie year, like that, it's actually pretty rare the 5th round pick gets cut going into their rookie year, but the percentage drops a lot going into years 2, 3, and 4. That plenty of 5th round picks don't complete their 4-year contract, so it would be less shocking there. And that's a spot I think Shaq Thompson has to beat out probably 2 of the 3, but beating out Balin Spector and Ulofosio isn't crazy. Like, that's totally doable. You could totally see a scenario where heck, they might consider that getting Spector back on the practice squad is more doable than Shaq Thompson, and they could just say that, hey, we'll roll the dice there and we'll take whichever of you don't get claimed and bring the other one back and have Thompson as the 5th linebacker, with Andreessen looking obviously more likely right now.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would be clamoring to claim Spector as a defensive player, but special teams might be the area where maybe he gets that where teams are like, all right, well, this guy has 3 years of core 4 special teams abilities, and he's shown it on tape that he's been pretty good at it. So that might be the only reason they might want to keep him. But it's like we pointed out, this is a crazy defensive roster to where they're going to have to make some tough decisions to just be able to get to 53 with the 2 guys already suspended, which is actually like 55. So then they're going to have 2 more decisions after that.
Yeah. It's a great problem to deal with, but it's going to be cut down day. It's going to be super interesting. I have to assume there's going to be another, weird late Russell Bodine, Manyweather kind of trades happening come cut down day again. One last one before we get into the tight ends. Obviously, I think what appeared to be the vast majority erring on the side of caution, health-related things. A lot of the guys seem to be working out pretty aggressively off to the side and going through the paces pretty well. And obviously there's no reason to push anyone from a health standpoint. A lot of disappointment with Joey Bosa, but he seemed to be working out pretty hard off to the side here, so at least encouraging heading into camp. A lot of other guys there and doing stuff off to the side. Taron Johnson going through, some partial drills. The one that obviously piqued everybody was 1st round pick Max Hairston towards the end of today's. Ended up having some lower leg, maybe knee-ish. Obviously not asking you to speculate on what or why, but I'm sure that was a major topic of conversation around the folks there at practice.
Oh yeah. It was right near, it was one of the final reps of practice. I think it was one of the last few 11-on-11 drills. And I was still over on the defensive side of the field. So I was right there for the entire thing. And he was definitely in a bit of pain. And I'm not going to speculate on what the injury is because I just don't know. But I do, from what it looked like, it was an apparent left leg something that they were working on, and he definitely had a slight limp as he was walking towards the huddle at the end of practice there. And at the end of practice, after the post-practice defensive backs drills concluded, which he did not take part in, but he was watching, he took a long, slow walk, just talking to Nate Bresky, their head athletic trainer, as they went into the training room together. So that would lead me to believe that he's probably done for minicamp, which of course, err on the side of the caution. And also he's still unsigned. So that's a piece of the puzzle here. But I think the Bills are probably just having to hope that it's nothing serious, that he'll be ready to go in 5-6 weeks here for training camp. And that's the way it's trending for a lot of the other guys. Like even the ones you brought up, most of them were participating in offensive and defensive install. So which is essentially a walkthrough. And that is a good sign that they're on the cusp of potentially getting back sometime soon. The only ones that really weren't participating a ton were Cam Lewis, and today Laviska Shenault didn't participate in practice in any capacity. So those were the two ones that didn't really see too much of, but everybody else for the most part was in their jersey and they were getting some kind of work in.
It's encouraging. And yeah, obviously we'll see. I mean, obviously like you get all the crazy questions on Twitter and people asking, oh, can we trade for this? Can we do that? And I get a lot of questions about like Shamar Stewart and the guys over in Cincinnati. But hey, like one, that's unprecedented. Like there's no guys who get drafted and then traded before they sign, but 3 of our guys haven't signed either. Do you think teams are asking if we're trading Max Hairston and TJ Sanders and Deion Walker? Like they just haven't signed yet. If they don't sign come training camp, talk to me then. But right now it's not really a concern. I'm only half joking. I spent a lot of time explaining to fans why the report about, I think it was Jordan Schultz had shared about the Bills, checking in on,
Jair Alexander.
Jair Alexander, pre-draft, which of course it made sense. The Bills hadn't added any. We've added 5 cornerbacks since then, depending on how you categorize Jordan Hancock. So of course that made sense at the time. It could have totally freed him up and gone a different direction in the first round. So that was very logical. It didn't work out, whether contractually, asking price, whatever. But I was telling people like, of course the Bills would want him, and adding more talent's great, but why would he sign with a team that just invested in a first round pick? Like he's looking to rebuild his 2026 contract value. He wants it, maybe not guaranteed, but committed snaps, and not a, hey, come in and compete with our first round pick to see if you play. And then as soon as Harrison got hurt, I was like, all right, never mind. Go ahead. Call Jair, see if you can bring him back. We'll bring him in. So obviously, let's hope him walking off, him standing and watching the drills are all encouraging signs that come training camp, he'll be fine, but certainly will be a priority to watch.
Yeah. And Alexander, it not only would he have to compete with Hairston, but he would also have to compete with like the prototypical McDermott Bill in Tre'Davious White for the starting job too, and Dane Jackson, who they also love.
Dorian Strong's got to rave reviews from his reps, so it's
Dorian. I think he's going to be a nice little stash in his first year, and then we'll see what he can turn into from that point forward. But yeah, he's super. Got good length, good height. Seems like the very, very essential sort of zone corner that they're always looking for. And maybe they found another late round gem, but it's way too early in the process for any of that.
Yeah. Obviously, lots of time, still a lot of positive buzz and plenty of good hope for Hairston, but just a downer for the way that minicamp's going to end. All right, so now for the topic of the show, we'll just go through a couple quick things here. Our tight end preview. There's not a ton of drama here. There's the Zach Davidsons of the world and things like that. I think Aaron was a big fan of Davidson and seeing if he could maybe be the developmental guy. Quintin, you talk about those core 4 special teamers. Quintin Morris kind of sneakily had been like top 2 in special teams reps the last couple years. I guess I assume that Jackson Hawes will have game day active ability and play some special teams. I guess I don't know that if I equate him to Quintin Morris in like the same number of, some of the coverage units and things like that, but never know. Like maybe that'll be there. Is tight end as cut and dry as it looks like? They're like, hey, there's 3 guys, they're going to make the roster, and they're stacked pretty well in like tight end 1A and 1B with their roles, and then Hawes is 3 for blocking tight end and special teams, and kind of is what it is.
Yeah, you pretty much nailed it. I mean, I don't really see too much drama with any of their roster decisions, unless, like Davidson just absolutely plays his way onto the roster. But even if he does, there's not a ton of spots to go around. Like they're not budgeting for 4 tight ends this year, and Davidson would have to have, legitimate special teams capabilities, and he has not really proven himself too much in that area since the time he's been in Buffalo. So that's a big piece of the job. I think Jackson Hawes will play a good bit of special teams. I'm not sure if he'll be a core 4 guy, but I think we could see him on 2 to 3, which is certainly equipped. And by the way, with Quintin Morris, there is a reason he went to Jacksonville. That's because Heath Schuler's down there, and Heath loves him some Quintin Morris, and I'm sure he's going to absolutely love having him on his special teams unit. So so they're going to miss him from that capacity. But yes, this is a Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, 1A, 1B situation. Jackson Hawes will get in there occasionally when they want to go 13 personnel, or if Dawson Knox needs a blow and they want to go 12 personnel and they need a tight end tied to the line of scrimmage, then that's going to be his role. He's not too much of a downfield threat. His route running is not super deceptive from what I've seen from camp so far. But if you're talking about a big guy who can stand in the middle and bring in a pass and be able to fight through some contact, that's what you're going to be getting out of him.
Yeah, and it's I think there was some times last year where obviously the Bills used jumbo 6 offensive linemen more than any other team. Not only more than any other team in the league, maybe like double or triple the next highest team in the league. But some of those, that's not Kincaid's strong suit. Some of those different pieces, having a guy that you could have 2 legit tight ends from a blocking standpoint with the jumbo set and say, hey, we're running right there. That's actually where you get some of the sneakiest like leak, routes and play action and things like that. And that's where the deceptive the scheme is the deception, not the route running. Like you're just playing on, hey, no one's going with it because they're dead certain we're running. And that's where it's like, hey, Jackson, when you're 15 yards wide open, just catch it. Just catch the ball and keep running. So we'll hope that maybe he gets a sneaky one of those. I'll cheat and count it as a big man touchdown. So as far as the top 2, there was a weird kind of renaissance last year in a bit of a precipitous drop. I think there was a lot of people, myself included, calling for a pretty big breakout for Dalton Kincaid. You looked at like, hey, once he came back from the injury, the last 13 games of his rookie season with the playoffs, he was already on pace at that point for like 113 target season. So like, hey, Stephon Diggs is leaving. There's nobody else stepping in here. I thought that the 110, 120 targets was a minimum. Like I thought that was just a given of what was going to be there. So that, fairly or not, set the bar pretty high. Then you have him playing, gets dinged up again, gets another injury. And I think respect the fact that he played through it, but it wasn't highly publicized in that like, oh man, this is a grueling injury. So I think a lot of fans just assumed he was struggling. Dawson Knox, who people were calling for maybe being released or not understanding, the value or the payment. Now some of his value coming back around and people appreciating more of what he contributed. It was a really weird cycle to be able to see. And now I'm curious where your head is at as far as their utilization and coming into this year. Do we see a bounce back for Kincaid, and do we think we'll continue to see Knox play as big of a role as he has?
Yeah, I understood like the maybe thinking that Kincaid would take a jump last year. Yeah. I think
but there was logic.
For sure. I think where I struggled with it a little bit was because a lot of those stats that he put together was in that, 5 or 6 game sample size when Dawson Knox was on IR or injured. And that at that point he was taking a ton of snaps. And once Dawson Knox returned, like Kincaid's stats were still solid, but his playtime definitely dipped. And his stats definitely dipped from that point forward. And so that's why to me, you always have to look for what the team tells you by their actions. And so when I believe me, I think Dalton Kincaid's super talented, and I could have, if you would have told me, hey, he breaks out last year and becomes one of their top targets, I absolutely would have believed it. But also, I know that they love Dawson Knox. I know Joe Brady loves Dawson Knox. Josh Allen loves Dawson Knox. They've been boys forever, and he does a lot of the dirty work that Dalton Kincaid just isn't really equipped for at this point. So that's where the projection needed to happen. Like, he needed to show that he could be stronger and stay on the field in these situations, to where, you know, maybe if they're running a play action where they're teasing run, that he's the guy instead of Dawson Knox. But I think what we wound up seeing is that they viewed Knox to be a little bit more versatile than Dalton Kincaid. And that's something that Kincaid is going to have to work through. Now, am I sitting here saying Dalton Kincaid is a bust? Absolutely not. Like, he went through it last season. And even before his injury, his snap counts were still pretty good. Like, he was over the 55% mark, I believe. And when he came back from his injury, that's where the snaps really started to plummet, because he was playing through all that stuff. And so I think a bit of it's kind of weird. Like, I went from this, okay, I think people are maybe a little bit too high on Dalton Kincaid last year, to where this year I'm like, okay, is he kind of a post-hype, like, sleeper buy low guy now this year? Because it's kind of weird. I'm a fantasy football guy, so I know these terms. That's to me why Kincaid has a little bit of, like, underrated value to him, because, you know, like, part of this kind of reminds me a little bit of the Spencer Brown discussion. Just because like, Brown, after his second year, like, people were calling for him to get replaced.
I was shocked, not of him being replaced, but that they didn't invest in competition. That there wasn't like a higher end right tackle of, like, hey, maybe it's him, but, like, don't we have a backup plan? I was petrified there was no backup plan.
I'm with you on that. But the way that they had talked,
awesome. But yeah, I was wrong.
Exactly,
I was wrong, but it ended up working out great. But I just, in the moment, I was shocked there wasn't a backup plan.
Yeah, for sure. The way that they had talked about him that entire offseason was like, okay, well, he's definitely starting. I'm with you though. They should have brought in some competition, but it wound up not mattering for them. So that I guess it all worked out for him in the end. But yeah, Kincaid to me is someone that I think does have potential. They said this offseason that they wanted to see him get stronger. You can't really tell if he did or not based on what we've seen so far at minicamp. I guess it's just going to have to be a tale of the tape once we see preseason and see actually in training camp, to where if he's more proficient as a blocker, because that is going to be what unlocks his true ceiling potential, and potentially being a 70, 75, 80% plus percent type of player.
And obviously tight end more than wide receiver, but I'll use Khalil Shakir as an example. Like, Khalil Shakir was a net negative in the run game his rookie year. Like, he would blow assignments where guys came untouched. We're like, hey, we're not expecting you to, like, you're not Hines Ward. We're not expecting you to dig him out and to, like, pancake a guy, but, like, throw your body in the way. Like, come on, you got to help us out. And he still isn't Hines Ward. He hasn't turned into some, like, blocking maven, but, like, understanding footwork, understanding body placement, understanding being able to disrupt and to pick up the right guy and to be able to be in position to do the right things. There's a step beyond the term that gets thrown out of the draft all the time is like a willing blocker. Like, well, he's willing to try. He's willing to do it. Well, like, in the NFL, there's a level of effectiveness that you have to have, or else they're going to find somebody else to put on the field. So I don't know that it's as easy 1-to-1, but, like, them picking Jackson Hawes is saying, like, hey, we might need the option that on 30% of those snaps, we need somebody in who can do that. And that we know they have that skill set, and that it would be great if we don't need to, but we've given ourselves the option now. And that, previously I won't pretend to know exactly Quintin Morris's blocking ability versus there, but Quintin Morris was certainly more akin to Dalton Kincaid than he was to Dawson Knox, and, like, the versatility and the movement skills and, like, the tight end, H-back, special teams, like, could do all the different things. Whereas, like, Jackson Hawes is not Dawson Knox, but is more on the Dawson Knox path of that kind of, traditional, full, hand in the dirt tight end, traditional tight end. So I'm curious to see, and they've given themselves the option to be able to do it.
Yeah, and with Dawson Knox kind of getting up there in his career, his age at this point, there is some wonder, at least in the back of my brain, like, okay, is Jackson Hawes the eventual Dawson Knox replacement here in Buffalo? Now, that's a bit away from that happening because Knox still has ability. Again, like I said, the organization loves him. Josh loves him. McDermott loves him. Bean loves him. So, and he's a big part of their culture and their locker room there. So I don't know that they would necessarily do that, but I think it all comes down to price point and how effective he is in the next couple of years when he's in the final years of his deal here.
Yeah, and Knox is about to turn 29 at a position that ages reasonably well. Like it's not like he's getting by on elite athleticism. Like he should age reasonably gracefully, health pending, that you see plenty of tight ends play into their early 30s, very well. So certainly in play. And as he's already done some extension and rework kind of things on the contract, we'll see where that comes up in the future, like you said. All right. I know I just shared your most recent camp takeaways. What do you have coming up next here to share with the people?
Yeah, I'll have another set of takeaways up bright and early. I think they post at 5 a.m.
Nice.
And then sometime next week I will be doing my post spring workout 53-man roster projection, which is a lot more difficult than people think, especially this year. But yeah, and then after that I will be taking my yearly month-long hiatus from from football, even because I save all my vacation for right before training camp, and yeah, so man. I'll be logging off a little bit.
Good for you. That's fantastic. And yeah, I think this year, as much or more than any, that 51st, 52nd, 53rd spot, you can make cases at like 4 and 5 different positions where there's a really tough roster decision, and that maybe the last year or two, there haven't been quite as many cut down day trade candidates. I think there are some shocking names that could come into play this year that, like, if Javon Solomon has some monster camp, like AJ Epinessa's name could come up in a move like that. Like, and again, not a cut guy, but like hey, maybe if we got a real offer, you could do something like that. There's some names like that at the offensive line. There's some names like that in the defensive back room. There's a lot of really talented guys here, and there's going to be some talented guys who don't make this roster. And again, I'm not going to try to give some galaxy brain idea that the suspensions were a good thing, but if those two guys weren't suspended, this would be impossible. Like, there would be guys that I don't even understand what they would do. Like, it's almost kind of a silver lining that they get to hide two of them, and you get like, hey, when everybody's clamoring for what's our trade deadline edition, it's Hoyt and Ogunjobi. Like, those are the trade deadline acquisitions. We're going to get them week 7. It's going to work out just right. Oh yeah,
sneaky trade name, maybe Dwayne Carter. I think that's someone that doesn't really have a home right now. So that's someone I'm kind of keeping an eye. Probably not, but it makes sense just because they have so many defensive linemen that they have to account for.
Yeah, we bring in 6 new guys that everybody has to be on alert. It's just a reality of the business of football. All right, Joe, thank you so much. You're very gracious with your time tonight. I appreciate you helping us out here with Aaron having last-minute issues. We'll give him a hard time, and we'll send him his fine check here after the show. But on behalf of everybody here at Cover One, our fantastic producer, Chris Kepner, we appreciate everybody very, very much. Shout out to our sponsor, William Mattar Law Office. It's great to work with. You guys know the slogan, hurt in a car, call William Mattar, 844-444-4444. Appreciate them very, very much. Looking forward to your next mini camp preview. We'll link that in the bio here when that drops tomorrow, so everybody can see that when you're listening to this. But on behalf of everybody here, I am Greg Tompsett. You've listened to myself and Joe Buscaglia, and we are out.